According to the Indian news site The Wire, 5 days before the Air India Boeing 787 Dreamliner crash that killed all on board, just 5 days before taking off from the very same Indian airport, another Indian flight, also a Boeing 787 Dreamliner from Delhi to Paris, had to return to Delhi due to an onboard emergency, a fire. However, even before that, there was already concern about the safety of Air India's 787s, but not just the Boeing aircraft, but the entire Air India fleet of Airbus aircraft as well. And I'll get to that in a minute. But this June 7 flight, AI143, had to be diverted to Abu Dhabi. According to an economy traveler who wished not to be identified, and who could blame him, said of the mid-air 787 incident that he was on, it seemed like a wire was burning inside the seatback electrical socket and there was a lot of smoke coming out of it and filling the cabin. The economy passenger said that about 4 hours after we took off, I think we possibly crossed into Dubai, and by then and suddenly there was smoke coming out of my seat. The passenger said there must have been a short circuit or something, because all of a sudden there was a lot of smoke coming out of that socket. But there were no flames, or at least visible. But it seemed like a wire was burning inside the plane, and that's why there was a lot of smoke. The terrified passenger went on to explain, at first I thought it was from the air vent next to the seat, and we were using blankets, so maybe the blanket had caught fire or some plastic stuck inside the socket. But it wasn't. However, finally the passengers alerted the crew, and the crew used fire extinguishers to hold off the smoke and potential flames while the plane made an emergency landing at Abu Dhabi. However, to make matters worse, once on the ground, they were not allowed to leave the plane and had to sit there and bake inside the plane for about 5.5 hours as technicians came aboard. Details on FlightAware show that the flight departed from Delhi at 1:18 p.m. for Paris and was diverted to Abu Dhabi. It then departed at 9:43 p.m. and returned to Delhi at 2:41 a.m. FlightAware also showed that the Air India flight was a Boeing 787, the same type of aircraft as the one that crashed just 5 days later. However, according to another passenger on board, they said they received word-of-mouth information on the flight that a fire had broken out in the economy section. While at first passengers told they would be allowed to disembark, they ultimately were not allowed to do so. In that incident, eventually Air India's engineers came on board the plane and worked for about an hour and a half to apparently fix the issue. But the passengers said yet no explanation was provided as to what was the cause of the incident or why we had to continue staying on tarmac. But now they said since the plane was stuck for over 5.5 hours, too much time had elapsed, and by that time, it was no longer possible to continue on to Paris, as landing past midnight in Paris isn't allowed due to noise restrictions. So yeah, two things you never want to see on your transatlantic flight: a 9/11 documentary or a fire. Thankfully, though, all passengers arrived back home safely in that case with no injuries. However, it's been no secret in the wake of the deadly Air India 787 crash, along with videos popping up online of that very jet suffering electrical failures on the previous flight to the one that crashed. Well, you can imagine why anybody and everybody who flies Air India, especially a 787, are downright scared. And then just a day after the crash, Air India had returned an India-bound 787 back to Hong Kong due to yet another unspecified technical difficulty. That flight arrived back in Hong Kong safely as well. But as you can see, Air India passengers and crew are all on high alert. However, even before the fatal crash, Air India's safety record, or lack of safety record, had been under the microscope. In a report this past May, India's aviation regulator warned Air India for breaching safety rules after 3 of its Airbus planes flew, despite being overdue on checks on emergency equipment and for being slow to address the issues. In the report, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, or the DGCA, it's like the FAA in the U.S., says spot checks in May on 3 Air India Airbus planes found that they were still flying passengers despite mandatory inspections being overdue on their critical emergency equipment, specifically the emergency escape slides. In one case, the watchdog found that the inspections of an Airbus A320 jet was delayed by more than a month before being carried out on May 15th. The report showed that during the delay, the plane flew to international destinations, including Dubai, Riyadh, and Jeddah. Another case involving an Airbus A319 used on domestic routes showed checks were over 3 months late, while a third showed an inspection was 2 days late. The report added that Air India failed to submit timely compliance responses to the DGCA, further evidencing weak procedural control and oversight at Air India. Air India, which was taken over by the Tata Group in 2022 from the government, said in a statement that it was accelerating verification of all maintenance records, including dates of the escape slides, and would complete the process within the coming days. The warning notices in the report were sent by Amish Garg, a deputy director of airworthiness in the Indian government, to Air India CEO Campbell Wilson, as well as the airline's continuing airworthiness manager, quality manager, and head of planning. While the DGCA said after the crash at a high-level meeting with Air India that recent surveillance conducted on the Boeing 787 fleet did not reveal any major safety concerns, it also said that it has recommended the implementation of a more systematic and real-time defect reporting mechanism to ensure that operation and safety-critical departments receive timely updates. The airline was advised to strengthen internal coordination across engineering operations, ground handling units, and ensure availability of adequate spares to mitigate passenger delays resulting from such issues, and strictly adhere to the regulations, the DGCA said in a statement. According to DGCA data, between June 12 and 17, a total of 66 Boeing 787 flights belonging to the Air India fleet have been canceled. On Wednesday, June 18, Air India announced that it is reducing international flights on widebody aircraft by 15% until at least mid-July. In a statement, it says it was cutting international services because of enhanced pre-flight safety checks and to accommodate additional flight durations arising from airspace closures in the Middle East. And routes between Delhi, Nairobi, Amritsar, Gatwick, and Gatwick are being suspended entirely as well. Given the compounding circumstances that Air India is facing to ensure stability of our operations, better efficiency, and to minimize inconvenience to passengers, Air India has decided to reduce its international service on wide-body aircraft by 15% over the next few weeks. So like I said, it's been no secret in the industry that Air India, especially after its takeover by Tata, safety has not been one of Air India's top priorities, and we all saw how that turned out. So here's a question for you. When is the next time you think you will fly on Air India? And are you worried? Or are you worried about the 787 in general? Well, as you know, I won't know until you let me know down below. So that's all I have for now. So don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and ring the bell. Until next time. Yeah, this is Maximus.